is the 11 Dubcast. I'm Johnny. He's George. And oh man, we've got some hot button issues to talk about today. I'm excited to really put our fingers on the pulse of Ohio State fandom and just piss everybody off.
Yeah, drop some hot scalding takes, some controversial opinions.
Well, okay, so it's the off season. It's been a pretty quiet week, but I also think that the topics, the things that we're going to kind of get into, particularly the first one, is a very sore spot for Ohio State fans in general. And that's kind of wanted to talk about it. So we'll get into that. We'll do Ask Us Anything. We'll get into in my opinion, a fairly dumb ESPN article, but we'll talk about the reasons for that.
Classic hashtag off-season content.
And look, I am the last person to complain about off-season content, and I'll complain about this in greater detail later. I hate it when people in the off-season go, must be the off-season, what a stupid article. Like, don't read it. Don't read the freaking article. However, with that said,
I almost made that joke to open the Weekender when I wrote it on Sunday, and then I was like, I would need to do this with some sort of self-awareness that I'm also writing off-season content for 11 Warriors, and I just say, you know what? It requires too many layers, and I'm just getting rid of it.
There's two different types of off-season content. There are stupid listicles that websites like ESPN and whatnot try to gussy up and pretend that this is something essential. And then there's weird stuff. And anyone who ever complains about weird stuff can absolutely get bent. The off-season is the prime time for letting your freak flag fly as a writer, and anyone who whines about that should just turn off the computer until September. I do, however, understand and will endorse complaining about stupid listicle stuff, unless it's something I wrote personally. Because I have definitely written, I did it tongue in cheek. Anyway, whatever. We'll get to it.
Top 7 reasons Michigan sucks.
Jesus Christ. We'll get to it. We do have to start, though, with the item that I think is a little more pressing, a little more sensitive, which is, of course, noon games. And my personal opinion is that Ohio State might play one noon game in 2025. The reason why a lot of this has been, part of the discourse, capital T, capital D, the discourse over the past week-ish, is because Fox has kind of officially announced that Ohio State will be playing Texas in week 1 on their channel.
By the way, what the only thing better than off-season content is? Off-season discourse.
There, that's right. So look, if Fox has Ohio State, Texas, you can almost guarantee that that's going to be a big nooner, right? Like, there is almost no feasible way that Fox is going to move that to a night.
Well, let's pump the brakes on that, because I'm sure that you have more to introduce with this story. But
a little bit,
as our friend Dan Hope astutely pointed out while covering the news of this story during last week, when Fox Sports published the article announcing that they were going to have the broadcast rights to not only the opener against Texas, but also the game once again.
Right.
They said in the original article that Ohio State, Texas was going to be Big Noon Kickoff before retracting that sentence from the story. So what?
I think they just didn't want to piss people off. I think they got
the cat's already out of the bag.
Right.
Isn't it?
Yeah, but that's my point. Like, why would you publish it in the first place? Like, why would you even write it if that's not the case?
But why would you feel the need to retract it if you know the reaction is going to be negative?
Because they're stupid and people were yelling at them. They're like, oh, maybe we'll keep.
But the retraction isn't going to change that. People are still going to be mad. We're literally talking about Big Noon Kickoff relative to Ohio State right now still.
But honestly, had they not done it at all, had they not published that, people still would have been like Big Noon Kickoff. Like that would have been the immediate reaction that people had, because that's
that's why I think it's interesting that they went out of their way to make that retraction. Yeah. Like,
I think they're just stupid. I don't think there's any reason behind it. I just think they're dumb as hell. And here's the other thing. like, I know people are upset about the fact that Ohio State just keeps playing all these huge marquee games at noon, and you absolutely should be. It's really, really stupid. But Fox also has other sports obligations that they have to work their way through during that part of the year. They have MLB, they have a bunch of other crap that they're trying to put on there. I'm pretty sure baseball already has the agreement for night games during that time period. So even if they wanted to, there might be contractual obligations that they can't get around. And I know that, the word on the street, the scuttlebutt is that, your best friend and mine, Ross Bjork, was trying to convince the powers that be at Fox to rethink this decision. But I just don't, it's too profitable for them, man. They win that time slot every single time, and they're not going to give that up. I would love to be wrong. I do not think I'm going to be wrong on this. I think it's going to be a big noon, and then they'll encourage people to watch baseball at night, and you'll be mad about it.
Here's what I think is interesting relative to the Ohio State fan perspective on this. As I said, I did the Weekender on Sunday. I was editor over the weekend, which, it was a good weekend for it in the sense that it was pretty quiet. There wasn't really any news, and pretty much the whole beat is on vacation. So I'm the boss. I'm in charge of everything that happens at 11 Warriors. But I ran on the poll for Saturday and Sunday, and on Sunday I asked, which network do you most enjoy watching Ohio State football games on?
That's a good question.
And I was pretty surprised at the response, if I'm being completely honest, especially relative to what we just talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I gave 5 options because there were, to my count, 5 different networks. If you bundle ABC and ESPN together, 5 different networks that ran Ohio State games over the last football season.
Yeah, which is insane. Honestly,
it's a sign of the times.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's unavoidable. I mean, it is what it is. But you don't get a $7 billion television media contract without doing that kind of crap.
Now, I objectively think that CBS has the best coverage of the sport of football, collegiate or professional.
I think they do a great job with the NFL. I hate Tim Brando. I want to put him on a rocket to the sun, but in general, yes, I would agree.
I don't mind him. Frankly, I actually like Gary Danielson, and I don't understand why so many people. I don't understand why so many people dislike him. Now, we're not in the Vern Lundquist days. I wish we could go back to them. I miss Vern dearly.
I hate Vern too.
Vern is
as specifically. I do have to say, and a lot of these guys obviously do a ton of different sports, right? Vern Lundquist, I think, was an exceptional basketball play-by-play guy. I don't give a crap about golf, but he did a great job, calling huge golf events and things like that. Very good at that kind of stuff. I just could not stand both him and Gary Danielson salivating over every 3-yard halfback pass that, like an Alabama quarterback threw, oh my gosh.
Well, you know what? If we got Vern for the Big Ten era of CBS,
he'd do the same thing, but it's annoying as hell.
Well, no, but you're tainted by your disdain for the SEC.
That's fine.
Point.
It doesn't change my point.
I'm saying objectively, you remove conference from, okay, taking the commentary booth away from it, I just think in terms of camera quality,
production,
and
way better,
videography, everything. I think that they're the best.
Correct.
The Big Ten Ohio State fans, they did not share my same stance.
Yeah.
With a statistically significant share of 11 Warriors readers or Buckeye fans, whatever you want to call it, over 1,700 respondents to this poll as of Sunday night. Almost 50% of them said that they most enjoy Fox for Ohio State football games.
Which is interesting, right?
That's given all of the vitriol that exists around Big Noon Kickoff that we just referred to. I fundamentally don't understand how that's possible.
Do you think it's just a function of people being angry at ESPN in general because they're always bad?
Because they were ahead of Big Ten Network and CBS and NBC.
Okay.
They got 27% of the respondents to say they were the best.
And what did Fox get?
Fox got 50%.
Wow. That's wild. That is really interesting to me. And
NBC got 5%. They were the lowest, which I think is more outrage at Peacock than anything. But guess who's getting all the Ohio State night games?
that's right. Whenever they play Central Michigan, right? You're gonna see them on
Oregon
or Oregon. Yeah, right.
I think their really coverage is pretty good too, even though I don't like Peacock.
Well, yeah, it's fine. To me, it's such a mixed bag. I think to me, there are some obvious deficiencies that you can kind of point to when you talk about the broadcast. For instance, ESPN, right? There's so much talk about how they allocate their TV cameras and West Coast games not getting, what East Coast games get and all that kind of stuff. And, their loyalties as a broadcast company and how they choose to portray the sport and all that kind of stuff. That's all valid. I think that all makes sense. I don't know, to the casual fan, how much you can really discern between these products, if that makes sense. If you don't watch a lot of football, and let's say you only catch maybe 5 or 7 Ohio State football games during a season, are you seeing a huge significant difference between all of these in terms of their actual production package? I don't think so. On the other hand, the biggest change that you'll notice is when the games start, right? When are you going to get hyped up for a game? And I think that's what pisses people off, because look, I was at the 2006 Texas game. Okay. I was literally about 50 feet away. I was in A deck, maybe 100 feet away from Ryan Hamby as the, as the touchdown goes off his hands. I was right there. And despite the crappy outcome, the atmosphere in that stadium leading up to it, all around it, was just electric. Besides the 06 Michigan game, I have nothing else to compare it to. It was unbelievable. It was an early season game. And this is, when it was less, it was more rare. It didn't happen as often, right? These huge early season marquee matchups between top 2 and 3 teams. And it was sick. It was absolutely sick. And I understand why Fox is doing it for ratings, and it works. They're going to win that time slot easily. But it just sucks for the fans, because it's going to suck a lot of that energy, a lot of that intensity out of the stadium. And I've been there for the exact opponent in roughly those same circumstances, and you're not going to be able to replicate that at noon. It's not going to happen. No, so it's really unfortunate.
Fox just doesn't do it for me. It's not like I actively don't like their coverage, but they're certainly not. You could start to see it last season. Gus Johnson has lost his fastball.
He's been doing it for a long time, man. Yeah.
But we're not in the getting away from the cop speed era anymore of Gus Johnson calls and commentary. I remember the biggest storyline coming out of the Purdue game was how disappointed Ohio State fans were with Gus Johnson's call of the touchdown that Jack Sawyer scored.
Yeah, where he's Jack Sawyer scored a touchdown.
People were like, the Gus Johnson of old would have lost his mind. And granted, he kind of made up for it when he almost lost his voice during the Ohio State-Michigan game when Jack Sawyer made the interception. Right. So he had a little bit of a redemption moment, but the energy is just not there for the guy. There's a lot of people that really respect Joel Klatt and think he's this great analyst.
I think he's fine. I don't like him as much as
he's anything special.
Blackledge or whatever.
Yeah. He doesn't put them over the top for me in terms of giving substantive analysis. So when you factor those two things in with a lot of people, I feel like this is true of any network, but people have noted for Fox in particular that it seems like they really oversaturate the amount of commercials and commercial breaks in their own production relative to some other network. I don't know how true that is, because I think pretty much every broadcaster is trying to keep their advertisers happy with halftime. So I don't know why it would be
they all essentially have a calculus that they have to do there's no ESPN's going to insert another ad just to make everybody mad. That's not how that works. It's literally, this is who paid for what. We have to put this X amount on TV, and it doesn't change depending on the broadcast. It's the same crap.
But the commentary, I think, at least isn't as good as it maybe has been in years past, but not to the point that I think it's an active detriment to the broadcast or anything. But when you combine that with the leaving something for wanted, with the fatigue of Big Noon kickoffs relative to Ohio State, I'm frankly shocked that the 50% of a statistically significant sample of Ohio State fans would say Fox is their favorite channel on which to watch an Ohio State football game. I feel like if I ran the inverse of this poll with the same options and said, what's your least favorite network to watch Ohio State football games on? Fox would win the poll.
I know.
You know?
That's exactly
the other 50% of fans
exactly.
that didn't vote for Fox here would say Fox is their least favorite. So I just wonder how fated to be unsatisfied Ohio State fans are generally with every single part of this experience of being a Buckeye fan that doesn't involve winning a national championship.
Right. Well, then maybe it would be a toss-up to see where Ohio State fans would feel like, where they would stand on proposed legislation that would prevent Ohio State from playing noon games except for Michigan.
That's the only game that I really want to see happen towards night or in the late afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, they've done it before. I mean, the 2006 game that I just referenced, that started at 3:30.
And that's the most romanticized game in the history of the rivalry.
That's right.
Like, how can you not? Why would you not want to invoke that further? It just doesn't make sense to me.
I kind of agree. Like, again, I love noon games in general, just like as a concept. I think it's cool that you get up and you do all that kind of stuff. But also, it would be pretty kick-ass for more Ohio State, Michigan under the lights. That would be pretty awesome. I do kind of like the tradition of it being at noon, but that doesn't have to be an every year thing for me. But anyway, yeah, Tex Fisher. By the way, if you're an Ohioan and your name and you go by Tex, and I don't know if that's his actual name or not. I really hope it's not. Actually, I kind of hope it is, because if it isn't, then that means he's willingly calling himself Tex and he's from Ohio, which is one of the most infuriating things I can think of. But he wanted to put out a bill.
Wikipedia says.
I tried to figure it out. I can't. It just, everything says Tex Fisher. By the way, does not look like a Tex. He looks like a guy who was like, he's a composite of every like Wall Street bro you've ever seen in your entire life. But the hair just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Anyway, introduced this bill. He's out of the Ohio's 59th district. That's near Youngstown.
This guy's this guy's Ohio House portrait. He looks AI generated.
I know. So
he's not a real person.
Well, he's not a serious person in any event. This is just the kind of dumb crap. Like, there are so many issues in college sports and other things like that probably do need legislated, like talking about NIL and figuring out how that works with public institutions and all that kind of stuff. This is not the crap that needs to be focused on. And
we're going to be in a cold sweat during Ask Us Anything next week when we get an email from Tex.
You know what? If Tex wants to send us an email and defend his ridiculous bill, he's more than welcome to do that. I would just ask him, if he's going to defend his bill, what other legislation have you brought to committee and has successfully gotten signed into law? That's really my biggest question, right? Because if the answer is none, then I would just personally recommend starting with something that actually like will impact someone's life in a positive way, as opposed to take that, Fox, and then maybe I'll get 20 extra votes at the next primary. Like, give me a break, dude. This is not something that people need to be wasting their time on. There are hopefully more pressing issues that the Ohio State legislature can address. Also, I don't even know, like, how do you even enforce that? Anyway, it's pretty silly.
I bet Tex is a big fan of Chris Pan.
I would want, honestly, like, if we could get all of those guys, the dude who did the no flag planting bill, Chris Pan, and Tex Fisher, if we get them all in a room and just maybe the greatest minds in the state of Ohio can come up with a way to make sure that Ohio State football fans always vote and support their, brands.
That's the think tank that we need to work with Ross Bjork to improve
Yeah.
the Ohio State game day.
A real
experience.
Algonquin roundtable of the brightest minds of the state of Ohio.
The
I
Ohio Legion of Doom.
They're gonna meet. They're gonna meet on like the top floor of the new Browns stadium, and laugh about all the.
It's like it's a big silver Buckeye football helmet that emerges out of the Cuyahoga.
Yeah. No, it looks like the Legion. The Legion of Doom's headquarters. Meanwhile, the money breaks and the old intended. Yeah,
it's not a bad reference for a 31-year-old. Right?
No, hell yeah, dude. Way to pull that out of your ass. That's excellent. I appreciate that. Anyway, it's dumb, and I guess if Tex Fisher wants to write in, he can. But I just don't understand why this is even a thing, why they even bother.
We're going to run out of attention getting Ohio Bills eventually, aren't we? I mean,
I don't know.
How much more room is there for stuff like this?
No, I mean, there's plenty of ways that you can waste time and not actually like produce meaningful legislation. Tennessee just did a whole like, we're keeping NIL in-house and we don't care what the federal government says. And I'm like, well, that's cool because that's not really how federalism works. But
it's funny you bring them up because I was wondering, like, if this has been this ridiculous this recently in the state of Ohio, I wonder what kind of goofy legislation gets drawn up in SEC states, and probably has been for a while, that we don't ever end up hearing about because it's not relevant to Ohio interests,
right?
Oh
no, I mean, it's all over the place. I actually wrote an article several years ago. This was interesting because it was specifically about sunshine laws, again in the state of Tennessee, but it was talking about like how public institutions, specifically Tennessee football, could kind of like stymie investigations into their activities via FOI requests and all that kind of stuff. And the point is that they wanted to weaken sunshine laws that existed in the state of Tennessee and then also later in Georgia, because they didn't want reporters poking around into how they were doing recruiting. Now that's not as big a deal, obviously, because we got NIL and you can pay players and all this other stuff. But that was a really interesting case because obviously it was impactful for football. But if you think about it, I mean, it's a state institution. It impacts all state institutions, right? So that's a big honking deal. And I don't know. I'll have to dig up that article again and kind of get into the particulars. But there was a reporter who was pretty dogged and trying to go after, track down like some of these things that Tennessee football players were doing. And she was just getting stonewalled at every turn.
Oh, what a shock.
Yeah, I know. But she was getting an enormous amount of hate for it. And I don't know. It was just a really interesting story. But anyway, my point is that state legislatures, I don't think they will ever run out of ridiculous ways to try to score cheap political points. I think that's kind of their whole thing. So, yeah, it's I think silly, but who knows? Who knows what's going to get passed and turned into law these days? It's really kind of a crapshoot. Anyway, so that's our first.
Before we
round.
move on,
go ahead.
Who's your least favorite? What's your least favorite network to watch Ohio State football on? Give me your favorite and your least favorite.
Ohio State football specifically.
Yes.
As long as Tim Brando's not doing it, and I genuinely hate Tim Brando. I think CBS is a really good package. I do enjoy quite a bit. I do enjoy their football package.
This is a man of culture, right?
Yeah. Their production, all that, their camera work, all that stuff is very well done. I do enjoy that quite a bit. And they've refined it so much with their football coverage, their NFL coverage. I think they're the best network to watch the NFL on. And I think that carries over to their college football stuff. Again, as long as I don't have to listen to freaking Tim Brando. Least favorite, I really like... NBC has been so associated with like Notre Dame and only Notre Dame for so long. It almost feels like they don't know how to talk about any other college football team sometimes. And it like, you don't, when you're trying to hype up a game between Ohio State and like, I don't know, Purdue or whatever, you're not going to talk about waking up the echoes or like the history of the game. Like no one cares about the history of Ohio State Purdue. And it does not matter. What you do is you have to like talk about upsets and all that kind of stuff and whatnot, but nobody cares about what happened in the 1950s. And sometimes NBC feels like they they get stuck in that mode where it's like, we really want to, like, get those 70, 80-year-old guys who are watching this, and we want to put that tear in the corner of their eye. Like, no one cares. So I do think they get a little maudlin, a little ridiculous with their coverage sometimes. Can I say one other thing?
Sure.
Okay. I'm adjusting my seat. I'm strapping. It's like, I had forgotten about this. And this is a choice that ESPN made during the college football playoff, and it just annoyed the absolute hell out of me. It wasn't just Ohio State's college football playoff games, but it was a lot of them. So this probably only matters to me, and I'm probably the only person who was annoyed by it. But their bumper music, right? So like when somebody scores a touchdown and where there's a change of possession or whatever, and they're cutting to commercial, and they have bumper music, Ohio State's bumper music was like the most dad rock, soft rock crap, like dun 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 dun, dun. Like they're playing like the Pretenders and stuff. I'm like, what? This is none of the music they were playing was like cool or hyped or whatever. Or like,
you think they want to get the general college football fan excited about Ohio State?
But I don't know. But that was,
come on.
Like they played, Rush sometimes, but even Rush isn't like, this isn't exciting music. And I was just so pissed off because every time they would cut, it would be like, and I'm like, what? Kick some ass. Like, what are we talking about here? Like, who is selecting the music for these? Anyway, it made me really annoyed.
Listen, they did, one of their songs that they used quite a bit was Running Down a Dream by Tom Petty. And that's, in my opinion, that is the greatest highway rock and roll song.
It's a fun song. There is
no better song to drive a car to on the highway than that.
But it's not a football song.
No, I agree.
That's my problem.
It's kind of weird, but it's such a great song to me.
It's a fun song.
I can't be bad at it.
I don't hate Tom Petty. I'm a fan of Tom Petty. I like Tom Petty.
And nothing will be worse than that year when they were only there. Do you remember that year where they were like only using Imagine Dragons? Like they've had much worse years than the most recent one in terms of their music selection.
I just think Running Down a Dream, like that's exactly what I'm talking about when I'm saying like they could have like made these things so much more dramatic, so more hyped, and instead you've got like Tom Petty going to it's like,
see, I was so mad over slights at Ohio State's brand when like, Fowler or whoever is saying things like, oh, it's a crimson avalanche when when Travion Henderson is running all over Oregon. And it's like, I'm so locked in on being upset about slights like that I don't even notice what the outro music is as they're cutting to commercial.
Drives me nuts. I get it though. Like you're right. I mean, it's probably just me who's losing his mind over.
So their coverage is easily my least favorite.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of it. Can you
believe that the gap between? So I told you that Fox and ABC were the two that got 75% of the vote in terms of like what the best network is for watching the football games. The gap between CBS and Big Ten is only 3%.
Okay.
That's insane. But CBS got 12% of the votes. Big Ten network almost got 10%.
Yeah, which means that people are like, I don't even have seen enough games on these networks to form it.
That's crazy to me, though.
Yeah.
It's insane.
No, I mean, and Big Ten network's been around for a while.
I watching Big Ten Network cover Ohio State spring game, I talked about it in our recap episode. It was a dreadful experience.
It was pretty bad. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's interesting how each of these kind of brands put their own spin on it. But ultimately, like I said, I think if you're a casual fan, you don't see that much of a difference. But when you watch it as like we do, and you're rewatching it over and over,
it's our job to be obsessive about these details.
Right. I just remember. Okay, so when Michael Phelps was like going for the record for most gold medals in the Olympics, right? Every time that he was getting ready, getting on the podium, getting ready to be on the podium, the music that they used was Knights of Sidonia by Muse. And like, that is one of the most kick-ass, like, I'm going to like ride down the bad guy and trample him with my horse kind of music ever. And I'm like, that was for a guy just swimming laps. And so I just feel like for football, you could find a song of equal, drama and hype. That's all I'm saying. There's got to be something better than Less Dance Mary Jane. Whatever.
Okay, they were not playing that.
All of Tom Petty's songs sound exactly the same. Anyway.
The first Grand Theft Auto 6 trailer used Love Is a Long Road by Petty to
That's true.
Resounding success.
And that actually
put some respect on Tom Petty.
Well, you gotta,
Johnny.
Okay, but look, Tom Petty is the consummate Florida man. You gotta have one of his songs.
Absolutely.
For that. Yeah. So that made sense to me. I was okay with that. All right, so that's the first part. We're going to get into another item here after Ask Us Anything. But before we do that, I want to remind you that the Dubcast is sponsored by the Dry Goods Store, 11warriors.com. Shirt, hats, stickers, all kinds of great stuff. Check it out. Drygoods.11warriors.com. We've got some cool new play diagrams, including the Lone Star Heist, starring your favorite Ohio State players beating Texas in the heart of Texas. Which I don't think people made enough noise about that, how Texas basically got a home game for that freaking thing. But anyway, regardless, it doesn't matter because it worked out. Last thing, we got to do Ask Us Anything. What am I saying? Goodness gracious. All right. So this is from Josh.
Wait, you got to remind the listeners that they can write to us.
Oh, that's right. You can write to us to Dubcast. Oh, man, I'm off right now. I got so mad about this stuff.
You got so worked up about Tom Petty.
About Tom Petty and music.
You can't even think straight.
Dubcast at 11warriors.com. Send us questions. We'll answering them. Josh wants to say, this isn't, I guess there's kind of a question here. But it's more of a comment based on something we were talking about last week. So he says, I was surprised that I sort of disagreed with your guys' take on Ohio State's game environment. Turn off the podcast now, Josh. How dare you disagree with something that I said? It's not that I disagreed with the comment or complaints you had, but I hard disagree that there's nothing that you can do after you sit down. Because in my years as a student, when I was part of the band, I got to roam the stadium more. I found that fair weather cheering in the stadium really hurt the environment. And then Ohio Stadium doesn't create as much noise as it probably could. So is he overblowing the issue? I don't think so. And this is something people have been talking about for a while. And I did forget to mention it last time. They've moved the students around so many times in the stadium that it really decreases their impact, which is super annoying. I do think that as ticket prices have risen, the marquee games, including the Michigan game, are less crazy, less impactful because you have people who can just afford it, and they're not going to be the kind of people who show up and lose their minds. So I do think that has a significant impact, where people are positioned and how costly it is to get into the game. So I don't know. I mean, it isn't the same Ohio State that it was 20, 25 years ago. I think that's another part of it. The kids are different, and it's a different, student population. That is kind of the smart kid school in the state of Ohio, and that changes things too, I think. So there's a lot that goes into that. I would agree. I think that's a fair point.
Sounds like Josh enjoys the porta potty experience in the South Stands.
Yeah.
I think, Josh, you got to consider it from the perspective of the fact that you just said that you were in the band. I mean, your game day experience is going to be inherently not only different from that of the common fan, but I would imagine you've got a much more active role in terms of providing something to the atmosphere that isn't just jumping up and down when Seven Nation Army plays before every kickoff.
Mm-hmm.
So I would imagine that you having that kind of a role, and yeah, you're going around the different areas of the stadium and you're playing Hang On Sloopy for the people that are in the nearby sections, and they're reacting positively to the energy that you and your fellow bandmates are putting out there. And you're on the field for Script, Ohio. You've got an inherently more special game day experience than I think the average fan does. And frankly, I mean, he said something that, I hinted at last week in terms of, how loud the environment is. The thing that I said at the end was that I'm not where Bjork seems to be more occupied with like the light show aspect of it. I'm looking at it more from the perspective of if you want to improve something technical about the stadium environment, you got to improve the acoustics so that the sound and the noise that the crowd makes is somehow better retained within the
Right.
stadium to make it louder. I'll never forget the first game that I ever worked at 11 Warriors was the Tulsa game when Travion Henderson set the single game rushing record in an Ohio State uniform and did it as a freshman. And the thing that was crazy about it was that the stadium, I think, was barely like 3/4 full to see it because it was like a hot day and the second game of the season in September, or it might have been the week after they lost to Oregon. I can't remember what the sequencing was. I remember it was in 2021, but the head coach of Tulsa after the game remarked that it was quieter in Ohio Stadium. That this is after they, hang 40 points on Tulsa and whatever and double them up like 42-21. And this coach still felt like ballsy enough to make the remark that that team that just whooped our butt in the fourth quarter of this game, their fans were relatively quiet for the performance that the team that they're supporting had. So
yeah,
I think that says a lot about how the noise level of the stadium could be enhanced somehow. And I think that even though you're right, the dynamics of who the average fan at the stadium is, whether it's a student or an alumnus or what have you, has shifted over the recent decades. At the same time, I don't think the stadium is built to where it could be maximizing the amount of noise it gets for the crowd size that it can hold. So
right.
if I were going to be making an investment into improving the game day atmosphere at Ohio State, I would start with the acoustics. And Josh, I mean, it sounds like that you agree with that based on the end of the comment that you wrote to us. So.
I think that's a good point. And, it's 100,000 people, but I do think the overall impact of the game day atmosphere has decreased as the years have gone on. Yeah,
I haven't been to Happy Valley, but I have been to the Big House multiple times, and it certainly gets louder in that stadium than it does in Ohio Stadium. And Happy Valley is notorious for being one of the loudest places in college football.
Right. Well,
so
what I would say,
potential is there relative to the comparable crowd sizes of those two stadiums.
But here's what I would say about Penn State, and this is maybe kind of like the intentionality of how they, allocate seats and things like that. Penn State's, their stadium's an erector set. It's random, bleachers thrown everywhere. There's no way to entrap the sound inside, but it's still loud as hell because they focus on keeping those students as close to the action as possible and creating this expectation that the atmosphere is going to be intimidating. Ohio State doesn't do that, right? Like that's not the goal. It's more about seating and money and things like that. And so when that's the case, you're not going to have the same kind of impact, I think, as you have at a place like Penn State and Happy Valley. Next question here. This is from Kevin, who says, speaking of Happy Valley, do you think a strong rival is necessary for Ohio State football? So like Penn State, Notre Dame, not Notre Dame, Michigan, does there have to be Moriarty to Ohio State Sherlock Holmes? I don't know why that's the rivalry my brain went to. But does Ohio State need that to steal, temper, steal, and all that kind of stuff?
It's competition is healthy in terms relative to innovation. I mean, that's just an inherent American principle of business. I think is that it becomes easy to get complacent when you don't have somebody else offering a threat to your own goals or success.
Yeah.
If Ohio State played the kind of schedule that an independent, I don't want to quite invoke Notre Dame because they still do a relatively decent job of filling out teams on their schedule that are competitive. And they usually get about one or two ranked games on
Yeah,
their
no,
schedule every
they
year.
don't shy away from scheduling difficult teams. I mean, they've, to their credit, and I won't give Notre Dame a ton of credit as an institution, but like to their credit, I think they've been pretty good about making sure their schedule is up to par.
But how much less confident would you feel about Ohio State going into the postseason if they were to play a schedule like, say, Boise State's?
Oh yeah, I
every
mean,
year?
way less confident. I mean, absolutely, and I absolutely agree with that, because you have to have something, like you said, you have to have something to compare yourself to. You know what the goal is, and if there's a team that's always standing in your way every year, and that's a good team, you have to get over that, right? You have to be better than that. And when Michigan was down for so many years, I mean, it was that was one of the things about Jim Tressel's kind of later teams, where it was like the Big Ten was super weak. Ohio State was easily the best program in the Big Ten. They were crushing Michigan every year. And then, once they would get into the bowl game, we're like, I have no idea what's going to happen, because they've played crap for the past 3 months. And there's no
because the SEC is so good by comparison.
Yeah, I mean, but honestly, it's not that it's just that they hadn't had to play like a real difficult schedule, and that, I think, that does change things. So I don't know. I do think it's good when Ohio State has a rival. I do think it's good when they've got a team to compare themselves to that they want to get better than. I think that's important for any team, really, not just Ohio State. So
yeah.
I agree with that.
Iron sharpens iron.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll say this too. It's more fun beating your rival when they're really good.
Oh yeah, 100%.
When they're really bad. I understand, like, not wanting to see Michigan do well at all, because frankly, it's very, very funny.
Yes.
But at the same time, it is so much more emotionally satisfying to beat them when they're good, and you get to spoil their season.
Remember when Ohio State beat
when their
Michigan?
Season is already spoiled, and they're just basically trying to spoil Ohio State, which is what happened in the most recent season.
Wasn't that 2018, 2019 when like Michigan was actually favored in the game, and then Ohio State won by
that was 2018.
Yeah, and they won by like 25 points.
That was when Haskins threw for 6 touchdowns on them.
Yeah, and that was hilarious. That was by far the funniest of Urban Meyer's wins against Michigan, because of the situation, because of the fact that Michigan was so good. My favorite, I only saw 2 Ohio State Michigan games in person, right? 2006, which obviously was, game of century, blah, blah, blah. But 2004, where Ohio State was a significant underdog against Michigan and blew them out of the water. And it was, every single second of that game was funny. I enjoyed the hell out of that, in part because Michigan was so highly regarded and Ohio State was just kind of limping. I think they were 6-4 going into that game. It was awesome. And Ohio State just beat the tar out of them at home. So, I like to see more of that. And, I think it is important that you have teams that kind of step up. And Penn State, I mean, it's interesting because Penn State has, I think, a reputation nationally as still being a pretty, marquee, not necessarily a blue blood, but a marquee program. But Ohio State has been so good against them in the past like 10, 12 years. I think they've only lost once, that it's weird to even think them as that standard bearer. And of course, obviously, with the last few years, it's gone back to Michigan, because that's the team that you want to beat. So we'll see what happens with that. Great questions out of you guys. We'll keep answering them if you keep sending them. Last thing I want to talk about real quick. ESPN did have this, again, very stupid listicle, but it's not stupid because it's a
off-season content.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not going to hate on somebody making off-season content and trying to be creative and interesting. I think that's totally fine. And I hate it when people roll their eyes at something weird. It's totally acceptable, on the other hand, to roll your eyes at something stupid and rote. And a ranking of the best college football coaches is exactly that. Now, I'm normally would just ignore this. However, I think it's important to talk about, because, first of all, I think the rankings actually are probably pretty accurate. Kirby Smart's number 1, Ryan Day's number 2, Dabo's 3, Marcus Freeman's 4. That might be a little.
And high. It's worth mentioning that Ryan Day was ranked 10th last year.
Right.
So
right. Yeah. Winning a national championship will help
too.
that. Steve Sarkisian, number 5. Dan Lanning, number 6. Kalen DeBoer, number 7.
Now this is where I start to disagree a little bit. So I'll be curious to see how you would rank a lot of these names.
I wouldn't put James Franklin at 8. I think that's insane, considering the guy is like 3-17 against top 10 opponents, something like that.
He's ranked 8th on ESPN's list. So are you saying it's insane to have him in the top 10?
Yeah, he shouldn't be in the top 10. I think that's
I totally agree with that.
Like I said, he's like 3-17 against the top 10. The top 10 opponents. Like he's
I
bad.
don't remember who said it last year first, but whoever was the first person to point out that James Franklin is who people thought Ryan Day was.
That's right. That's right.
I
that's exactly right.
Brilliant.
Totally Kyle Whittingham at Utah is 9, whatever. That's fine. Matt Campbell at Iowa State is 10, which is really funny. Like it feels like every other year people like, okay, so Iowa State went 11-3 in 2024, so now he's in the top 10, and then next year they're going to go 6-6 or 6-7, and he's like going to be the worst coach in America. That every other year, Matt Campbell, like he alternates between being really good and really bad. So it's funny that last year apparently was a good year. Someone else, Bonagura, I guess, one of the guys who was contributing to this, put Bill Belichick as number 1.
Kirby got 11 of the 12 first place votes.
Yeah.
And one guy didn't make Kirby number 1, and it was that guy that made it Belichick. Which there's a cute argument for it. I'm not going to act like it's inherently a dumb choice. If he is the greatest NFL coach of all time,
sure,
it stands to reason that he would probably have some measure of high-level success at the collegiate level before ever stepping on.
I don't think I would give him props for that when it hasn't happened, though. You know what I mean? Like, there's cases,
and
there's
that
many
is
cases
100% valid.
Yeah, there are many cases of people going from the NFL to college and vice versa, and just completely falling flat on their faces, and it's because it's not the same thing. Like, I understand Belichick is
in the vice versa case, it worked for Urban Meyer, didn't it?
Right. Of course, he realized you couldn't just like indiscriminately kick guys and say do better, and then they would do better. It doesn't work that way.
And then there's guys that are bad in the NFL to start, and then go to college and end up being good. Urban was at Michigan, or not Urban. Saban was at Michigan State before he went to the Dolphins, right? Okay,
yes,
all
he
right.
was.
So
yes,
but it's not like he was an institution at Michigan State.
No, I mean, then he went to LSU and he was good there. He won a national championship.
So he was at LSU before he went to the Dolphins?
No, I want to say he went to the Dolphins after MSU, and then when he came back, he went to LSU, and then he went to Alabama. I could be wrong on the sequence of events.
I think he went to Alabama from the NFL. He wouldn't have gone from LSU to Alabama. He would have never been forgiven.
We got to look this up. I don't know. That's a good question.
The SEC fans. I feel like he would have had to go from LSU to the Dolphins, and then the Dolphins to.
I mean, that would make sense.
Alabama.
Let me check and make sure. My point is that I don't have a huge problem with the rankings. I do think some of the stuff that they wrote is just like completely out of pocket. Like I do like that Kurt Signetti. Come on, man, give the guy a break. But
the big thing is admonishing like fourth of the panel ranked Ryan Day at number 4, where he in the aggregate he finished number 2, and the main thing that they held against him was his record against Michigan.
Right.
But the thing is, Kirby Smart has a very similar record against Alabama.
That's
so
right.
By that same standard, it's like you're going to hold it against Day that he hasn't gotten it done consistently against this one team, when you can say the same thing about the guy that you ranked number 1.
Right. And it's not like, it's not like they're trashing him. They still ranked him number 2, but like, it's still.
Right. Well, no, but those people holding it against him ranked him number 4.
Yeah. Right.
Is the thing.
Right.
So so why haven't you downgraded Kirby then by a similar standard if you're going to downgrade Ryan Day from number 2?
Well, because it's ESPN and they want an SEC guy at number 1.
That's exactly right. It's also why they had Dabo at 3. I wouldn't even have Dabo in my top 10.
Really?
No.
I put him in the top 10. I definitely wouldn't have it number 3.
No.
I think he's
That guy rode Trevor Lawrence to all of his success. Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence to all of his success.
By the way, you were
what
right
has he
about...
done since Lawrence went to the NFL? They shouldn't have even been in the playoff this year.
That's true.
They got bailed out by a lucky sequence at the end of the ACC championship.
That's true. That was not enough people talked about that. I think a lot of times, I honestly think people said like, oh, well, it's Clemson, so they should be in, so it's okay. But if that were like, I don't know, some other ACC, if that had been Duke or whatever in that situation, people would have talked nonstop about how they didn't deserve to be in it. To your point, by the way, about Nick Saban, you are correct. He was at Michigan State for 4 years. Then he went to LSU for 4 years. He was at the Dolphins for 2 years, and then he started at Alabama in 2007. So, yeah, I mean, he was bouncing around all over the place, but he won a national championship at the college level before going on to the NFL and being thoroughly mediocre, and then obviously came back to Bama, and then, the rest is history. But
yeah, so I don't know if there's quite a comp for what Belichick is attempting to do here in terms of being supremely elite at the NFL level and then jumping down to the college ranks. So I think that if you want to say that a guy that was the best at the highest level of the same sport, probably stands to reason he would be the best coach at the sport at a lower level.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's a far-fetched argument, but it's one that you're not going to be able to really make on substance just because it's kind of an unprecedented situation. So
you would say, as far as like overrated coaches, you would put Dabo super high up there, which I think is
I'll tell you what my top 5 was, because I made this week's question in the forum. I made it. Give me your top 5. I said top 10. That requires a little bit too intensive thinking. So it's just top 5.
It's too much of splitting hairs at a certain point.
Right.
But,
exactly. So I said, just make it 5. I think the 4, I don't want to say it's inarguable, but I feel pretty confident in my top 4.
Okay.
Kirby, Day, Marcus Freeman, Dan Lanning.
Okay.
That's my top 4.
I'm cool with that.
5, there's a lot of different candidates you can do for 5. I'm going to go with Kyle Whittingham.
Okay.
Because I think that that guy's the longest tenured FBS coach at one school.
Yeah.
And he has consistently gotten more with less out of that program than I think anybody else in a program at any other school in a comparable position can really say that they have in recent seasons. He is the reason that Caleb Williams never won a postseason game in college.
That's a good point.
Utah is
it's really funny, but that's true.
Football program because of Kyle Whittingham.
Whittingham's really good.
I think he's top. I think he should be 5th.
I think that's fair. I really like Sark. Honestly, I think he's definitely rebounded from his days at USC.
I'm not sold on him.
Here's why I say I like Sark. Texas is a rat's nest. I mean, the booster situation that you have to deal with, the problems between administration and staff and the people supporting the program have dogged that program for years. And the fact that he was able to walk in there, essentially change the culture, get people on board with what he wanted to do, make them patient enough to like wait a year. That's a hard thing to do. And I understand Texas has all the resources in the world, but that's why it's even more flabbergasting that they never got it together, after Mac Brown left. I think he does a really good job, honestly. And I don't think he's going to stop doing a good job. Like, Texas is going to be a really, really good team next season.
They're going to be they're a solid program, but I mean, the expectation for them has always been that they should be a solid program. That's what people say about Ryan Day too, right? And Ohio State. I mean, that doesn't change. Yeah, but there's never been a meme like Ohio State is back the way there's been around Texas up until the most recent season.
Right.
Right.
No,
it's like, this is the guy that finally got them to perform up to expectations. That makes him a top 5 coach. I think about what a guy like Kyle Whittingham could do if he were the head coach at Texas. I guess is kind of my point.
I mean, that's fair. I mean, it's, and people have kind of said the same thing about Kalen DeBoer, right? Like, okay, so you're going from Washington where you had a tenth of the resources and attraction and all that stuff to Alabama. And so now you're going to just kick ass. I don't know what's going to happen with Alabama. I know a lot of people were like disappointed that they didn't just hit the ground running this season. That's not going to happen when you got to change the culture and all that kind of stuff. That's just part of that kind of transition. I still think DeBoer is a very good coach, but I mean, we'll see.
I wouldn't have him in my top 5, but that's mostly just because he still has more to prove in the program he's at.
Right. And I think the next 2 or 3 years will determine, just how good he actually is, because sometimes resources and, they're not everything. And Penn State's got all the resources in the world, but James Franklin is James Franklin, and he's the master of shooting himself in the foot. And so it doesn't matter sometimes. So I just think coaching is a big, big part of that. And, so we'll see what happens. It'll be interesting. Honestly, this is a huge year for Ryan Day. And I know a lot of people are like, well, we'll just coast on the national championship. And I think he'll get a decent amount of leeway for that. But the amount of turnover is massive, right? You're replacing coordinators. You're replacing a huge chunk of your team. I think this is going to be a big test of his coaching skills. So we're going to see what happens in 2025. I think Ohio State isn't going to take a huge step back, but they're going to take at least a little step back. And how people react to that will be very interesting, because I don't think they're going to beat Texas at the beginning of this upcoming football season. And I think it depends.
That's a discussion for another.
I agree, but we're going to have to see what that looks like. So anyway,
one more thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Relative to the others receiving votes on this article, which one of these 3 do you find the most amusing? Deion Sanders making it into the top 10 list of 3 of the panelists. Uh-huh. Kirk Ferentz making it onto the top 10 list of 1 of the panelists. Or Sharon Moore not getting any votes whatsoever.
Sharon Moore is an interesting thing, because I don't think he's a bad coach, honestly. Like, Michigan improved, obviously, over the course of the last season. And, of course, they beat Ohio State at Ohio State despite being huge underdogs.
You mean improved within the context of the season, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, they didn't improve from the year before. But my point is...
It took them 4 quarterback changes. And
No, they started off as an abject disaster. And the fact that they were able to salvage anything out of that season is kind of amazing. He, I think, did a really good job. But the problem is like coordinators, personnel, that kind of stuff. I don't think Michigan is in a great spot, and I don't think they're as in nearly a good spot as I think they are going.
Sharon Moore out coaching Kalen DeBoer in the bowl game is why Kalen DeBoer is disqualified from my top 5.
Yeah, well, and Michigan was out their 2 best players, so yeah, it's pretty bad.
They were out their 2 best players against Ohio State also.
I know. So yeah, it's a weird thing. Deion Sanders being in the top 10 is hilarious.
Only on 3 of the 12 panelists top 10 though.
Well, you know what? Dillingham is a guy that I thought would get a little more love than he did. There are a lot of good names on there. I think like Cignetti. I mean, God, we love Cignetti. That dude freaking
He was
rules.
Tied with Belichick for the second name left off the list.
Which is insane. The guy who won the most games at Indiana ever in a season is tied with the guy who's never coached a single game in college football. It's fun. Brian Kelly just out of the top 10, which is funny because I actually think he's a pretty good coach, but just like the worst human being on the planet.
You got to remember, one of the most sneaky, amusing storylines relative to how ESPN covered the playoff was Indiana getting killed for making it in based on their performance against Notre Dame.
Right.
Then not only does Notre Dame go to the national championship, but it turns out Indiana ended up playing them closer than any of the other teams.
That's right.
that Notre Dame beat on their way to the title game.
That's right, including a venerated SEC team.
After ESPN threw a temper tantrum after the first round for a 3-loss SEC team not getting in over Indiana.
That's right. I would have loved to see Brian Kelly, though, like get just absolutely housed by Notre Dame.
It would have been Ole Miss, I think, that missed out, not LSU.
No, fair enough. Anyway, so that's
but Ferentz getting on one list doesn't do it for
No, that's the weirdest thing about that. I have any idea how that happened. I almost feel like that had to have been a mistake of some kind because it makes no sense. Like, that's one of those, like, someone knows where the bodies are buried kind of deal. Like, I mean, Kirk, whatever. That's weird to me. All of these things have, the dumbest things. But anyway, that's the Dubcast for this week. We'll be back next week to talk about all the whys and wherefores and comings and goings of college football and beyond. But until then, I'm Johnny complaining about listicles.
Oh.
I'm Johnny.
George laughing at listicles.
Sorry, I threw that in there. And we'll see you next week.
Take care, folks.